So first, let me apologize for my voice. I have a bit of a cold, so bear with me. I'm Sabit El-Fishawi, a product manager with Google, working on YouTube. And I'd love to take you through kind of how Google does product management, why you should care about product management as a first step, and what does Google do specifically when it comes to product management. And then the second half of the kind of the workshop, if it will advance, great. And the second half of the of the workshop, basically, I want to focus on practical tips. So I know some of you are probably working on your own startups or thinking of working on your startups. So being a good product manager means you're getting a good product out to the market. And I'll leave some time for your questions, but I'll precede that with some tips on what you could really do to ensure a good product goes out there. Let me start with a quick question, like, why is product management important? Any of those products you use and you like, or you have a strong feeling, maybe hate as well, like either way. If you look at one of those, like for me, I guess YouTube is the natural one, but on anything else, even non-Google products, there are products that I really associate with, and I think, wow, that's great, I really love that product. And usually that's a proxy for the product has been managed in a good way. So people have thought about how users use that product, how to make the experience good, make it, of course, not buggy, make it intuitive. Think like when the iPod came the first time, right? There was a ton of MP3 players out there, but then Apple cracked it. So they put something out there that people are like, I understand that, I can use it. That is usually a sign of good product thinking. But what is product management in general? And I found this and I stole it from that website because it kind of made so much sense. So I work day to day on this, and when I looked at that cycle, it made a ton of sense. What this cycle is saying is you're always iterating, right, which is a function of the tech industry. But you usually start with innovating. So whether it's a new product or an existing product, you're thinking of, I'm exploring ideas on how to create this new product or make it better. And that's a phase of product management. And then you move into design, right? So you basically going from an idea into an actual, here is how it could look like, the metaphorical kind of napkin, right? You can draw it on a piece of paper and say, I think it should look like that, or at least visualize it. But then you go, as a following phase, you go basically into implementing, building, testing, ensuring that it works, and then pushing it out to market. So, and as soon as that's out, basically you're thinking of V2, right? So you're starting ideating again and going through the cycle. So that's basically what product management is all about. And I found this slide that actually broke it down into those 5 roles, right? So it broke it down as, to manage a good product, you need to have different hats. I think I'm in the way. You need to have different hats, right? So if you look at the last column there is a hat of a business analyst, right? A business analyst simply is, you're looking at data. Imagine you have a product that's out in the market. So you're looking at how people are using it, looking at studies, and then you're kind of trying to draw conclusions out of this data, right? So that's the business analyst in you. The coordinator, because basically you have somebody developing the code, you might be at a later stage startup where you have somebody focusing on marketing or communication. So you have different functions or legal, and you're coordinating between them. But also project manager, right? So imagine you have usually it's an Excel sheet with everything that needs to be done, and you're kind of ensuring that it gets done. Who is going to do those? Your resource manager kind of hat, so you want to ensure that there's people. And then finally, the visionary piece, which is the one I started with. The cool thing about this slide, which I also stole it, I just went out and found a lot of good slides. It just shows you as you change from phase to phase, the focus of your role as a product manager changes, right? If you're early on, there is nothing to manage there, right? So you're mostly you're envisioning, you're thinking about how a product could look like. being a spokesperson, as in you're selling this idea and you're convincing people about it. But then as time progresses and as you're developing and launching, kind of the mix of those change. And I want to leave you with this idea of to do a good job of getting a good product out there, you want to be able to do all those 5 or 6 things out there well, right? So you want to be able to change from thinking about the future to actually implementing, to running after people and ensuring things are getting done. So it's all of those combined. I wanted to break it down to those kind of 3 phases and walk you through those 3 phases. They are the kind of the word version of the circle we've seen, right? So create a vision, go and execute it, and then prepare and launch, right? So let me start by the first one, which is creating a vision. And that's usually, especially if you're in a startup, that's usually the fun part, right? So you're excited about an idea, and you want to go out and kind of flesh it out a little bit. I found those 2 questions very, very interesting. Like if you're working on, this can be anything from a totally new product to a feature. You're adding something to your website or adding something to your app. Just ask yourself, what is the value of this, whatever you're working on, and kind of what problems are you solving? And I put in Instagram and Pinterest there as examples. Those are, if you think of it, before the fact, like before they launch, I think you might have thought, like, what value is like another camera app is going to add? And the answer probably would have been very little, right? It's something that is very basic. But maybe if you think of Instagram, and I'd love to hear your thoughts actually, if you were answering those questions, I think Instagram answered that question very differently, right? So while people thought of shooting and pointing to get a picture as very simple and straightforward, I think Instagram was trying to solve something different, not capturing a photo. Any thoughts on Pinterest and Instagram on those 2 dimensions? Love to hear your thoughts.
I think the value of Instagram is the filters thingy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can look like a professional.
Yeah. 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 I like the kind of the look as professional, because at the core of it, a lot of users felt empowered, right? Like you had to have like a kick-ass camera to be able to do those, and I started to be able to do all of those, and that, if you think of it as a problem, everybody wants to be a professional photographer, they solved that, which is very interesting, because they solved it by making the filters simple. You don't have to think about it. I mean, Photoshop existed for a long time before that, right? You could achieve much more, but they just made it easier. I haven't used Pinterest at all, but I'm told it's good, so that's why I put it there. Another thing, again, like think of it, we're thinking of defining a product and trying to come up with a product that is as good as Instagram, as catchy as Pinterest. Know your users seem to be a very kind of obvious thing, but I found things like getting in touch with the users themselves, like literally shadowing them. I think if you're if your product is a little bit later stage, that's what a lot of successful companies tend to do. They go and imagine your product is an app. PMs, product managers, would simply go and follow a user using their app just to see when do they use it. Is it while you're waiting for the elevator? Because that is a use case, right? You're trying to understand how your users are using the system. That depends, of course, if it's a more business, like an enterprise or a business solution, you can get that in a different way. You can talk with like sales folks who talk with those companies. You can do it in different ways, but I think the goal here is get to know your users is a very important part of kind of defining the vision. And one interesting thing that was always said about Apple was kind of they try and envision what users want before they kind of articulate it. And that is awesome, but if you can't do that, you can always just go to the users and talk with them. Um, Arriving to a consensus, I think I personally struggle a lot in that phase where there's so many good ideas and kind of funneling down and arriving to a consensus usually is the problem, because there's never a shortage of how can we make an amazing product, right? But then honing it down and defining it is a lot of the heavy lifting. And again, as a successful product manager is probably thinking that it's good that we do great brainstorming, but it's also important that we arrive to a consensus and we arrive to a vision and move on. One thing here that I think Google specifically tends to be heavily focused on is facts and numbers, right? So we can always have a view on why that product is good, but it's infinitely better if we're able to pilot it or have it as an experiment and see users are using it and unable to log off from that system, right? So trying to make that conversation and that decision more database is definitely helpful. I don't know how many of you, anyone has written PRDs before? PRDs? No? So a PRD is product requirements document. So the document that basically at the end of, imagine you're designing an app, right? Instagram. So you want to write a document that is not what an engineer or a technical person is going to take it and develop it, but rather something clearly stating what you're building, who are you building it for, what are the features there. So it could be as simple as a one page that sums up this whole exercise. So we went out, we discovered that a lot of people would like to have professional quality photos, but they are unable to do it. It's very complex, it's very cumbersome, etc. So we want to develop an app that will do that. It's very fast, it's very simple. It has a strong social element to it so that people can brag about how cool photos they can produce, etc., etc. So the idea is kind of, as I mentioned, like you highlight what are the use cases of your product in that. What are the goals and non-goals? Like I'm sticking to the Instagram example. Like we're not designing Photoshop, right? Like that was a specific choice by people who did it, that they don't want it to be an all-inclusive, everything in it. Like a non-goal for them was to be simple and direct. So these things are important to highlight. Another interesting thing is that's very useful is wireframing, and I'll share in the practical tips. Wireframing is basically drawing something out, right? Like if you can even at that stage go to the extent of saying, I'm launching a food delivery website and I think kind of this is how it should function, even if it's a drawing, that is usually very useful. So that's the first part. Any thoughts or questions on that, like creating a vision? Yeah.
If you say, let's say you're working on a startup and you're building a minimum viable product, how will you define what is a minimum viable product as a product manager?
Yeah. I wonder if I have it. Yeah. So I think. Wait, trying to think if I have it or not. But one quote that I heard that was very interesting was kind of think of what would get you 50% of the product. So imagine that the minimum viable for you is 100%, right? Like I want to build everything. And if you look at the numbers in terms of building 50% of those features, it's probably going to take like 20% of the time, while building 70 or 80% is going to take like 3, 4x, right? So it becomes a trade-off on time, and the better you are at forecasting this and knowing your team, it all comes down to time, like what you're trying to get out, and kind of you draw the line there. But I have something further to that point later on. Cool. So, there. So, I was trying to think of which slide was it. Yeah, so we just talked it, right? So creating a plan, there's a lot of work that goes into kind of, I want to get a V1 out. Usually if you're in a small startup, there's considerations there that are like, how much money do we have? What's our burn rate? Like there is a lot of factors that are outside of your hand. Like creating a great product probably would take more time. but you might want to get something out at a certain deadline, at least for your team. But of course, kind of the downside, I know this is not a definite answer, but that's kind of how you should think of it, is the downside is that you water it down so much and you go out with something that people basically will not use, right? So it's always this, this balance of thinking what should go out versus what should stay for a V2. I found this very interesting. Usually we tend to think of, here's the product and that's what we want to launch. I was personally involved in a lot of those cases where with every single milestone, you almost redesign a lot of things, which is insanely valuable. Like you can think of it as a lot of rework and maybe you're losing time and increasing your cost, but kind of even an internal demo, right? So you have something like even a front end without anything hooked, right? All the buttons are not working. But even getting the first external eyeballs on this, and external meaning not the people involved in the project, you cannot imagine how many things that were so obvious that as soon as we put it in front of someone else, we're like, but that doesn't make any sense. And we're like, yeah, you're right, that doesn't make any sense. Because you get sucked into whatever you're working on and you don't necessarily spot it. So what I found useful is with those milestones, it's basically, if you think of it, you're always showing it to new people or demoing it or giving it to new people to try it out until you reach to the full launch. A lot of the engineers I worked with tend to think of, we're going to do unit testing and then full testing and then we give it out to users. I think the role of a good PM is also thinking that apart from technically ensuring the product works, there is usability kind of work. So you need to show it to different sets of users and get a lot of feedback before you actually kind of launch it. So working with UX, so UX meaning user experience, right? So usually either that is your designer or you have somebody specialized who specializes in user experience, which is how people interact with your system or your website. And usually a lot of teams at Google have a special UX person who's working, who knows the product very well and has studied how users interact with that system. And I think this summary was made it very clear to me that as a product manager, you've thought through, I want to make the use case of somebody making professionally looking photos quickly, but then you take that to the UX, and the UX person is the one who helps you decide on how to make this, how should you surface it to the user. If you think of Instagram and the way they show the filters, it's very simple. Even the small icon shows you how the filter looks like, right? It's not a menu where you have to click and see how it looks and then decide to move on. So there is a lot of those things that could be done in the interface that helps the user understand what you're trying to achieve. And this is a very important part of getting out a good product, right? You can have an amazingly good technical product, but then if it's not clear to the user how it should function or what this button should do, then you lose a lot of value there. So that's kind of something that happens as you are developing the solution or the system that you're working on. You're also trying to ensure that it's very obvious and clear to the to your users. Any thoughts or questions? I feel I'm rushing through this. Yes. Yeah, I think it definitely differs from product to product, right? Like if you think of like Gmail is a bit of an exception, but if you think of general products, the more like, if you think of an enterprise solution, this usually, there's very clear guidelines of things moving quickly to a stable version, and then companies can use it, etc., like Google Docs and apps and things like that. I think as you go down the scale to very like consumer-facing products, this line becomes a little bit blurry because there isn't an SLA there that is important to maintain. I'm not familiar with why exactly Gmail stayed for so long. I was annoyed as well because I used it. I'm like, why is it still in beta? But that's kind of the general principle, because at YouTube there is a similar dynamic where if you think of tools that like big content creators use, these tend to be much more kind of things go in beta and then move quickly to be stable. But if we have like an experimental feature for creators to use to play with their videos, it can stay in beta for longer. Yeah, so the same idea here is I'm trying to kind of, as I said, a big part of the product manager role is you're interacting with different people on the team with different expertise. So engineers are usually the bulk of the team, and I found it very interesting because a lot of times you have engineers that are awesome, so they can do the PM job better than anyone. But also on the other hand, usually the product manager has a bit more visibility on the whole picture versus how should we build it in the most robust, scalable way. And in teams that kind of excel, in my view, is where specialization is very clear, right? So engineers have this huge technical advantage. They're able to see what's the most efficient and effective way to build something, ensuring that you're building something that is intuitive, does the job, etc., is something that the PM should worry about, and building like a good, robust solution is something that engineers are usually best at doing. So yeah, the kind of the final phase, and usually the much more fun phase, is preparing to launch. I only have 2 slides on this. If anything, like that's what I personally end up doing. I think that this thing is understated a little bit, but basically, if you don't use your product like your users, then there's something wrong there. And being able to use your product and test it and know every single combination out there that could be done is definitely interesting. And if you're sure to sit behind that glass like that guy, then your product is ready. If you're not sure, then you shouldn't launch. Back to your earlier question. Again, depending on the size, I'm just trying to make this as broad as possible. Of course, if it's a small startup, I mean, I'm sure there wouldn't be marketing and PR folks there, but if it's a bigger company, of course, a major component is working with marketing and PR to ensure you get the right coverage of your launch, kind of understand who should know about this. Think of Facebook, right? Facebook, whenever they launch a new feature, is that something they need to do a press conference about, or is that something that they show you this little bar on top that you as a user are able to see? So there's multiple ways that you can get your message to the user, and it's very important, especially the larger your product is, that you actually dedicate some time to this versus push it out and hope users would use it, right? So that's kind of important. As I said, it comes in a little bit later. And I had to put that slide, of course, after you launch and it's working, you need to celebrate. So yeah, I want to actually, so I rushed through the theoretical part, but I want to focus a little bit more on tips, practical tips on how kind of this works, as well as leave some time for questions. So I have tips on 3 things, and first is the team. So I love this picture because this is exactly how your team shouldn't be. So this is like the PM, the product manager, obsessed with the idea. Those are the engineers, like figuring out the best way to build it. This guy is the user experience person who thinks the idea isn't nice enough, so you need to put some bells and whistles on it. So reliability engineers, like there's engineers who develop the system and folks who ensure that infrastructure and everything is running. So that's why he or she is ensuring that kind of the table doesn't fall. TLM is kind of the lead engineer. I don't know what he's doing, but apparently not working with other engineers. Again, this is very obvious, right? So the team is everything, and the role of a product manager is really to be in the middle of this. so the best kind of practical tip I heard is just think about the team, because the problem is people don't think and hope magically things would work. But if you make it conscious in your mind that this is a team, people will want to go in different directions, and your role is to ensure that everybody's heading in the same direction. Maybe you do a good job, or maybe not, but at least you're thinking of it, which is important. The second thing, and that part I love, the process, right? So one role that PMs play is kind of moderating the process. And this cool kind of design thinking model was the whole idea of it is, especially when you're brainstorming, right? So think of this early stage of kind of defining what you want to build or creating the vision for what you want to build. I have found this model very, very cool. I haven't studied it, but I kind of like went to a couple of trainings where they explained it, and I'm sure if you Google it and read, I'm sure there's a ton of material out there. But the idea of empathizing with the user, so your user, defining, ideating, prototyping, testing, and there's a lot of focus on rapid prototyping to the extent of kind of booking a 4-hour session and saying we want to go out from that 4-hour session with 50 prototypes or whatever, X like prototypes. So the idea is the more ideation we do and the more things we design, the higher the likelihood that we'll get something good. So there is a focus on kind of this, which is at some point we're going to go crazy and try and think of everything and what's the best way to do that. But we're going to close the funnel after a bit and kind of test and maybe throw some of those ideas out. So I would strongly encourage you to read a little bit about this. If you'll be doing some brainstorming with your team, with your company to kind of better build a new product, I would strongly encourage you to at least read this and kind of get some thoughts. There's two things. I'm not sure if they are from that framework or general principles that I'd like to share. So one idea about kind of when you're trying to think of your product or your next product is, what are the user pain points, bright spots, and 10x better? I think pain points and bright spots are clear, especially if you're iterating on a product that's out there. So Windows sucks because it crashes. That's a pain point, right? I love OS X because it doesn't crash. Whatever product you're working on, users will be able to tell you that we love this and we hate that. But what I found exceptionally good is this 10x better concept. And I've been on a ton of usability studies where you can ask the question in so many different ways. If you have a magic wand, how would the experience look like? What are the things that you really don't want to be doing, like you don't want to even think about? So if you think of, again, an operating system. So I'm using Windows, and I'm a power user. I've been using Windows for, say, 10 years. And I come to you and tell me about your Windows experience. What wouldn't you want to do? And that usually there's a lot of insights there into I have to do 17 different things to achieve this. If you just make it straightforward to me, you've like really improved my life. So being good at kind of surfacing those when you talk with your users is definitely very interesting. I'll share with you one example of how this came about. We actually were trying to find something like that. And one use case that actually blew my mind personally was, you know how when you go to an event or a trip or something with friends, everyone takes a bunch of pictures on their phones or cameras, and those pictures never make it to you back, right? They never make it. They're always sitting somewhere else. And kind of if you think of this, for me, if I go on a weekend trip with some friends, it would really make my life a lot better if this experience is seamless, because I would sometimes send an email saying, guys, can you share the pictures? And 50% of the time I wouldn't get a reply, and that's it. Because it's a pain, right? So people would take their SD card out of the camera, put it into their favorite Sorry? Yeah, but if you think of it in terms of clicks. How many clicks does it cost you to actually send me your pictures? I'm sure the number is like 10, which is insane. Why isn't it a click? If it's a click, I think much more people will do it. Sorry? It is a click now? What, using a certain app or just? Okay. Cool. If folks don't mind dwelling on this a little bit, because I have strong feelings. So, but actually think of this, right? So you and 3 of your friends are on a trip in Spain. And this specifically, you want to make this sharing experience better after you guys are back from Spain. So, of course, I can always, from the camera app, open it, I guess, go through the list of my contacts and select people and all of that. But imagine something that would automatically detect that you and 4 of your friends on Twitter or Facebook or G+ or whatever are within the GPS coordinates of each other, taking pictures at a higher rate than on average, because if you're on vacation, you're doing that much higher than in your day-to-day. Realizes all of this, shows you a very nice notification saying, hey, are you with X and Y on a trip? Would you like that I create this temporary place where everything would be dumped there, yes or no? And it would be one click, right? It has already recognized what am I doing, who am I with, and created a solution for me. That would improve my life versus, I know I can go in and look at the gallery and select. Sorry? Oh, hey, app idea. Do I get a cut of that? I'm kidding. No, but again, it's one of those things, like I have strong feelings about this, but I'm sure if you talk with your users, they will have strong feelings about whatever app or whatever system they're using, and they would be like, if you give me that in one click, this is going to change my life, and that's usually important to hear.
Trying to solve something in software, which is the biggest hurdle, is fragmentation of hardware. Someone is using a DSLR camera, someone is using a phone. If everyone was using a phone, there wouldn't be a problem in the first place. It would be very easy to solve.
That's true. That's true. And even so, the question that you're bringing up is even much more interesting. How, if you layer on the fragmentation of the device, it becomes an infinitely more interesting problem, right? So, but again, imagine if that's solvable in one click as well. Then it becomes very, very cool. And usually those are the exciting, like whenever you come up with a solution to this, it will sell. So that's good to think about. This is, again, like that's my final kind of thought on this ideation process. I actually did this exercise, which was take a sheet of paper, fold it a couple of times, so you end up by this like 8x5 little squares. And the idea is within a reasonable time, you need to have all of those squares filled with an idea, like a drawing of whatever you're designing. Again, the focus here is on quantity, right? So if we generate like 500 ideas like that, there's bound to be 5 that are really good. And those things, I guess, like brainstorming, we're all good at brainstorming, but those ideas simply put a little bit of structure and makes it easy for your team to sit 5 minutes, fold that paper. Each person will come up with a ton of ideas, and that's usually helpful. Cool. On the tools, I have 3 tools that I think, like they do different things, and I think they're pretty important. So the first thing is kind of collaboration, right? So half my time I'm working on detailing what I think we should build next and how we should build it, etc. Until very recently, I actually didn't use Google Docs, but I find the feature that's very important there is you're always able to log in somewhere, so you can have like a shared repository or whatever, but you're always, as a team, able to find the latest version of whatever you're working on, and you're able to edit it together. And I think that's very important. So easy to share kind of docs. The other thing is mocking, right? So whenever you need to draw something, this usually speeds up the time of getting something out. And I found like Balsamic, which is this one, or any other tool that is out there that basically would have those components. So you can throw in a web browser component, add the buttons, add all of those things, and within 5 minutes you're able to visualize or like visually explain to someone else what you'd like to build, and that usually kicks the conversation and lets people, whenever they see it, they're like, but why don't you change this? But why don't you add this, etc. balsamic. I think it's with a Q at the end, balsamic. The final thing, and that's just general like project management tip, and I find it very useful, is there are a lot of free tools like Bugzilla, which is simply keeping track of what we're working on, who's working on it, and kind of like project management / issues and feature kind of feature request management. If you work with engineers, they usually would have a tool like that. If you're working in a smaller startup and you don't, I would strongly recommend that you have something to track the million and one things that you need to worry about. And Bugzilla, as I said, like it's a tool that is very useful, free, available. You should definitely think of having something like that running. Any questions on tools? No? So I want, before closing, I found this this note from an ex-Google engineer who actually kind of wrote like, how can you be a great product manager? And he had those couple of points, which again are very reasonable. If you think of it in a startup, this is your role as a co-founder or founder. You basically need to take ownership, be very persuasive, as in it's your thing, and you usually be very biased about the vision you have, but you still need to be very persuasive versus here's the way we're doing it. Being an engineer always helps, as in if you have the technical background and you're working with technical folks, this makes things a lot easier. And of course, kind of these I guess these are general, be a good person, I guess, recommendations. But at least the first couple of ones I've found very true. Whenever you're trying to get something out of the door and it's your role, I think focusing on those three things are very, very important. I have a link here. I didn't think this through because I thought like if I put the link big enough, you guys will see it. But I wonder if I should have had the QR thing or something like that. But kind of if you have some time, as I said, especially if you're doing your own startup now and you get to kind of deal with those issues of I have a vision, I want to move forward, I want to ensure that the team is with me. I would encourage you to read this note. I think it's very valuable. It details what does it take to actually do this successfully versus do it and run over people while doing it. So yeah, that's kind of all what I had. I'd love to take your questions. The link. You should take a picture. That's what I thought you should do. So any questions, thoughts? Yeah.
So you use personally Bugzilla for project management at YouTube?
I don't use it. We have something very similar to it, but I was kind of, when I was thinking of the kind of the tips, I was thinking, what do I use on day to day? And then if it's an internal tool, I was recommending something that is externally available. So I use something that does more or less the same thing, but it's an internal Google tool. Thoughts?
I have a comment on the cartoon you showed us.
Yeah.
The user here, you said that the user says that it needs more accessories.
The user experience person. So the kind.
I think this is not what the cartoon is saying. I think what this is saying is that usually engineers and product managers use a lot of accessory or try to develop the app in a certain way that the user does not know the actual purpose of it.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes so literal that it's actually a light bulb, but the user doesn't know what does it serve, what's the purpose.
So you've layered on so much stuff on it that it's not
exactly.
very. Yeah.
Doesn't know what the end product is.
I've been in teams where that was the issue, so I know that for sure. No, I agree, but I think as well, like the message here was at least like if we're building a light bulb, let's get everybody on the same page that we're building a light bulb, versus having people go in different directions doing that. Yeah.
How relevant is the drawing of UML, where project management, drawing of UML diagrams?
I think it's like I found it not the convention at Google. Previously, I've used it at least in college. I used it, but I think it's a convention thing. Like I found the combination of, remember when I mentioned the PRD, combination of a very clear, usually even one pager of here's what we're building and here's the use case we're solving for, along with mock, that kind of embeds some of UML kind of flow and structure in them, because you're trying to say, here's when I go do this, this is the state that we'll go to. So there is a little bit of that, but like documenting what we want to build and then showing how it should look like is usually a very good starter for starting to mock it, as in fully mock it and then build it. Yeah.
Sometimes when you're working with products that are really traditional and users find themselves resisting so much, well, how do you do things in the team? Are you transparent from the beginning, from doing the vision, or do you sometimes start in easily?
Do you mean end users are resistant to changing the product?
Yes.
Okay.
I think examples of forums.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I haven't worked on that very much, but I would see that issue. Usually, it's kind of resistance to change is in any product. So whenever I'll use Facebook as an example, there, like whenever Facebook changed something, people always didn't like it at the beginning. I think that's true. I think the way I think of it is usually like when we're rolling out something new, it's always accentuating what value we're bringing. So if anything, it's always what value are we creating to the user versus what hassle. I'll use the Google Reader example where like you can always get a lot users who would say like we don't agree with what you're doing, be it like discontinuing the product or like building something new for the product. So yeah, I don't have an answer for you, but it's just accentuating the value that you're bringing is usually a good way to go. Okay. Wow. Yeah.
I would also say that measuring data all the time, I mean, that's what Facebook always does, right? Like they measure all the data, and then whatever the users say or like complain about,
Yeah.
data is more reliable. So I'm not sure if that's
Definitely. No, that's definitely true, and it's true across the board, right? So it's at any stage of what you're doing, like thinking of building something new, pushing something and seeing the usage of it. I think something that Google does a lot, and I think it's a very good idea, is having this mass of data and always using data to inform the decisions, product decisions or otherwise. Great. I'll be here, so thank you very much. And if you have more questions, feel free to drop by. Thanks.